Welcome to the Warrior Legacy Network, where we cut through the noise and talk about what really happens when the uniform comes off. This is about veterans guiding veterans and great Americans who stand beside us, sharing lessons learned, mistakes made, and victories earned, so the next generation doesn't have to figure it out alone. The mission doesn't end with your DD-214, it just changes.
Well, greetings, warriors. I'm really excited about the guest that we've got on this episode because he, like me, is a fellow historian, loves to learn about history, military history. And the thing I think I like the most about history is the connection that it brings to warriors of the past, and knowing that a lot of the challenges and the things that we go through it has happened before and there's solutions to those. So with that, Daniel, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Likewise. Now, where are you calling in from?
Jacksonville, Flint.
Excellent. Well, I'm just up the road from you in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, so not too far from you.
My daughter's in basic training right now. She's in week 6 at Fort Jackson. She's in white phase right now. So
okay.
You know, that's exciting. Her graduation's on September 4th, and couldn't 89 Bravo is her MOS, so I couldn't be prouder of her. So.
And what is that? Help a dumb Marine like myself that doesn't. That'd be a great one. I always love those jobs that are not only awesome when you're in, but can relate to a lot of different things afterwards.
Yeah, she'll get in logistics, a wide variety of different things, and she'll do her AIT at Fort Greg Adams, formerly Fort Lee, and then she's going to go out to her first duty station, Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. So I'm definitely excited for her.
Well, this is the Warrior Legacy Network, and the keywords being Warrior, Legacy, and Network. And I'd like to talk about how all three of those got the two of us together. I got a chance to meet a mutual friend of ours, Colonel Rico Player, who's usually a co-host with me on the podcast here. And I met him right before he got out of the military. And not only do we connect with that military connection, but as he was starting to leave, I said, sir, what are you going to do? You've been in the military for almost 30 years. This is pretty much what are you going to do when you get out? And he was like, didn't really think about it. I'm like, well, sir, it's coming up like right around the corner. And just started talking about some different options and different things. And that kind of started this wonderful relationship that we had where I was a volunteer on Parris Island. He was the HNS commanding officer, full bird colonel. Technically, I was working for him. And then as we got out, he's like, hey, what do I do here? What do I do there? And then it's kind of like the roles change. So, Rico's a great guy and just a perfect example of paying it forward and helping our veterans as they get out.
Yeah, he's a fantastic individual. I met him through Parade Deck. I'm a change maker through them. We've been texting back and forth last fall, and then I finally got to actually meet him when I went to MIC to speak on behalf of Parade Deck about AI in the classroom, utilizing our veterans in the classroom as going beyond the textbook. When teaching Vietnam, I'm going to have my Vietnam veterans in there, explaining to the kids what the book says versus, this is how it was, this is what happened. And you can't, this is living history that's able to get up. And a lot of these guys, a lot of our First Coast Vietnam veterans, they use it as a form of therapy. So they come in and they tell their stories. And, I have a lot of them come to me all the time telling me, it's so refreshing to be able to share this story that normally they don't talk about, but they can feel freely to talk about it with my students, and Rico is just a fantastic individual, and when I finally met him, he's always been an advocate for, my educational outreach and all the things that I've been doing in and out of the classroom. So right now, currently, I sit on the board of directors for the Black Ops Veteran History Project, or the Black Ops Foundation, which advocates for the telling of the history of the special operations community. And we have roadshows all over the U.S. We've done a couple of roadshows at my high school. We're gearing up to do an even bigger show later on this year. Details of that will be a little bit more revealed later on down the road when we get everything finally solidified. But it's going to be absolutely fabulous. So it's opened up a lot of pathways for sure. And Rico has had a huge hand in that.
No, I can't wait to dive into that. I want to go back to something you talked about before, which is, I think, one of the key things in the mentorship journey. We think of the mentor as it's a one-way street, right? Where the mentor is helping the mentee. But a lot of people don't realize it's actually a two-way street. The mentor is definitely helping the mentee, but a lot of times the mentee is helping the mentor by helping them model that behavior, talk about those different things that they can help teach, and then it help resets it for themselves. One statistic that just absolutely floored me talking to Major General Will Grimsley, who used to be the Secretary of the VA here in South Carolina. And he said, we've studied what the avatar is of the veteran that commits suicide in South Carolina. So what's their age? What's their background? How do they do it? Why do they do it? Where do they do it? And what do you think the age of that avatar is in South Carolina today, the ones that ultimately make that horrible decision?
So like the age range that are doing this,
if like, what do they look like? What do they do? What age are they?
It's so hard because it's such a huge cross section. You can have the guy that just does his 4 years and gets out, and or you could have the career military personnel that get out and they have a hard time reacclimating back to civilian life, and that can go from anywhere from like 24 to 40 to 50 kind of thing. It's just,
so if I had to ask you, just pick one number, what's the age that you think that average age is? Because it's a very specific number or range, I guess.
Maybe
you could
35.
Say. That's what I thought too. It's actually 75.
Really?
And it's a white male that kills themselves with a gun, usually within a mile of their house, usually in the woods. And there's a couple really telling things behind that. First of all, is that age. It's the Vietnam vet. That's really what it is. The next thing is, why are they doing it? They're doing it because they have a ton of unprocessed trauma that they went through with not just the PTSD, but everyone nowadays says, thank you for your service. You get your 10% off at Applebee's. You get all these incredible benefits for serving. They got spit on. They were called baby killers. They dealt with this stuff, and just the self-isolation, the challenges. And when you start getting into this upper age limit, you realize there's not much left to live for anymore. I'm at the tail end of my life. Probably lost a lot of their buddies. Their health is starting to go downhill, and they do it in the woods with a gun. So that way it's not as messy. It's easier for them not to worry about a house or putting that onto their family. And when I was thinking about that, I'm thinking like, these are the people we want to be mentors, to mentor those brothers and sisters that you and I had in Iraq and Afghanistan that went through that type of stuff, to not just help them. But then I started to realize what you just talked about. This is incredibly helpful for the mentor also, because that Vietnam veteran that is getting to the end of their life, that's feeling like they've lost their purpose, that has lost their tribe of brothers, that is dealing with that unprocessed trauma, instead of having them self-isolate, which is one of the steps that happens when you ultimately commit suicide. It's lack of movement. It's you lose your tribe. It's lack of purpose, and then self-isolation. And then finally, usually drugs or alcohol comes into play there, and then the bang. These guys now have a chance to really go back and help that next generation and therefore helping themselves. And I think what you're talking about with your project is a perfect example of that. So tell us a little bit more. This is fascinating for me, about how you include them in these talks and the AI work you're doing.
Yeah. So when I teach U.S. history and I'm teaching Vietnam, I'm going to bring my Vietnam veterans in. This is a bit separate from the Black Ops Veteran History Project, but let me get up. I want to show you something real quick. Hold on. This kind of goes hand in hand with what you were kind of talking about. This right here, I don't know if it's kind of hard to see, but
there we go.
This is a bayonet and photo of William Combat Granados, Vietnam Marine veteran. That's a photo of him carrying it in Vietnam, and he speaks to my kids every year. And 2 years ago, we go out, have lunch, and he has this box. I'm like, okay, and he's holding it the whole time. And towards the end, it's like, I want to give you something, and I was just like, okay, what is it? He handed this to me, and I was like, Combat, are you sure you want to give this to me? And I was like, it's okay. The guy that I no longer see because of this, and me talking to the kids, I no longer see that guy. Talking about the NBA soldiers that he killed in combat. He's like, I no longer see their faces because I can share that history with your students. And he handed that to me, and I was like, I'm setting up my new office, but that's going to go in a place of honor on my wall.
Of course, yeah.
And it resonates with the fact that these guys, they don't have the outlet, like you were saying, and it's egregious how they were treated when they got home. They always say welcome for your service. I always say welcome home. I always give them the welcome they never got.
That's
and
wonderful.
And I tell everyone I come to contact with, don't thank them for their service, because a lot of these guys were drafted. Welcome them home. That will mean more to them than anything on the planet. And a lot of these guys are wearing their Vietnam hats again. We did a field trip a couple years ago. The bus driver, and I was like, hey, I welcomed him home. I was like, yeah, I can finally start wearing my hat out and feel proud about it again. I was like, man, that's insane. But the Black Ops Veteran History Project, what it is we do road shows for the community. We do it for the schools. We go out and we advocate for the history, the untold history of the special operations community, with a kind of like acute focus on women, Asians, African Americans, Native Americans. We have the Black Ops, the Veteran History Project documentary. We have individuals like Command Sergeant Major A.C. Coley, Mike Clark, Major James Capers, who our foundation is currently advocating for his Medal of Honor with Congress. So, anyone that's watching this, please contact your local representative, senator, and advocate for Major Capers getting the Medal of Honor, because that's a huge thing. He absolutely earned it. And he's like the prime example of Marines coming home that just got the shaft and got horrifically treated. And it's got to stop. And part of the Veteran History Project that we go in, we use their stories to really advocate and bring the history out beyond the textbook. So you might read about Jim Crow. Okay, that's great. How did that impact people that lived through it and then enlisted into the military? Command Sergeant Major A.C. Coley, he's come into my classroom and spoken to my students and shared that history with them, and their eyes open up. And they ask questions. The interaction is the big piece. It's more than you get when you sit here, the sterile reading of a textbook, and it's a one-way street. It's a one-way conversation. When you actually get to talk to the person that was there and get their perspective, that's a bit different now. Maybe they go home and talk to their grandparents who may have served but never talked about it. I've had a few students over the years that went back home and spoke to their grandparents, and I was like, no one ever asked me. And they opened up about their service, So there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of, passion and history that's in there with it. And the Black Ops Veteran History Project is proud to showcase that in a huge way. We'll be presenting at MIC. We're also working with the state of Florida and House Bill 1329, which is now required by law to teach the history of Veterans Day and Memorial Day in the classroom. And so we have designed lessons specifically to advocate for that here in Florida, focusing on Medal of Honor recipient Alvin Cash and various others, but Alvin Cash being native to Florida, and just highlighting that importance because it's getting lost. And it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. It's a factual, historical thing.
It's an American thing.
It absolutely is. And, I get into conversations with people, no, it's not. It's Veterans Day was commissioned after World War I for the ceasefire, and for Armistice Day and honoring our veteran community. Memorial Day is to honor the fallen. And everyone who has given their life in service, in the line of duty, to honor their ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms today. And kids there's just not the respect for it that there used to be, and I really push hard for that in my classroom. And I was really glad to see when House Bill 1329 became law that now we get to advocate for that, and that's statewide. So it's the mandatory teaching of Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Florida also has Freedom Week in September, where we are required to teach, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, key factors of, the nation's founding, which is fantastic. It's one of the things I really look forward to and enjoy doing,
That's great, Daniel. Tell us a little about some of those stories you were talking about. What are some good stories you might be able to share with our listeners?
So, in regards to the veterans that have come in and spoken?
The veterans that come in and spoken, or just some stories that really have stuck out to you around the Black Ops Project or any of the other Vietnam veterans you've spoken with?
Major Capers' story is really resonated, very, very powerful with me. We showcased that at USF last spring, back in February, and it was really impactful. When you hear the stories of these special operations veterans, and one of the, I love listening to General Remo Butler. General Butler, is absolutely fabulous to talk to, and he's an amazing human being. And when he started talking at the last panel I was watching him at, he's like, yeah, when he finally got to the upper echelon, got to the top, he turned around, he's like, you know what I saw? No one else that looked like me. And it just, it resonates like in that special operations community, it's just, the demographic breakdown. And he's just like, it's a wild thing to sit there and see. And it's the same similar stories that come out when they tell about their history and their service. And my students eat it up, whether they're watching his documentary or they're talking to our panelists like Sergeant Major A.C. Coley when he spoke to my students, talking to them about his growing up, in the Jim Crow South, what life was like for him, living on government cheese and all that kind of stuff. And then the opportunities that came to him by serving in the military, and the doors that just opened up. And my students lit up because I teach at a Title I school. So that's like 75 to 85% of my students are on free and reduced lunch, low socioeconomic neighborhood. That's just the general demographic that we have. So a lot of these kids are not going to be going to college, but they need to know there are other avenues that they can pursue. And the military is a great avenue. It really is. It'll give them training. It'll give them focus. It'll give them purpose. And it's absolutely fabulous to see students and I bring in Shirley Baez is another one of our board members, and she comes in because a lot of times what you don't see is female speaking at panels kind of like this. I know quite a few that do, but in the grand scheme of things, in the majority, when Shirley comes in, a lot of female students that they want to have that conversation with a female veteran, they'll have that conversation. And Shirley was she was the hit of the party at my school because my female students were asking her questions, getting all that information. And it was fabulous to see that interaction that, they might not normally want to talk to a male recruiter or, and it's fine. It's absolutely normal to see that. And they had great conversations with her. And some of them turned right around and went back and enlisted as a result of talking to her directly. So
that's wonderful.
And that's proof in what we do because it's bringing their stories to light, and highlighting what they accomplished because, you sit there and see, guys jumping out of airplanes, you see guys in the jungles of Vietnam doing all these crazy, insane things like, how do you sit there and focus on that?
So talk a little bit about Major Caper's story. Tell us a little bit about what happened in his service.
Silver Star recipient, originally Bronze Star, eventually got upgraded to the Silver Star. And going through his service record and looking at his service, his heavy, like all the 64 combat missions that he ran, all the insane things. He got battlefield commissioned, during Vietnam. And looking at everything that he did, coming out that there was a general that supposedly put in an accommodation for him to receive Medal of Honor. And so what happened was the paperwork somehow got misfiled. Right now, flash forward like 50 years later, we are currently advocating for Major Capers to receive that Medal of Honor. When you look at the, We Make Marines or like the proud Marine photo from like the late 1980s, that's Major Capers right there, on that poster. And it's so iconic, the Marine Corps used that image of him to do this. And we are now firmly, we advocated it under, President Biden. We advocated for it under President Trump. Biden. We're going back. We're continuously advocating it because we had to reapply the information and the bill back into Congress and keep promoting that and pushing that forward. And hopefully, we will get him. Hopefully he'll be commissioned or he'll receive his Medal of Honor within the next 2 to 6 months. I'm hoping.
It'll be wonderful.
It would. And it would just be the recognition that he deserves. He absolutely deserves it. A Marine's Marine in every way, shape, and form.
So tell us a little bit about the impact, and you touched on a little bit when you bring in these veterans and they get a chance to talk to the students. Talk to me about what happens when that conversation's over and it's just the two of you walking back to the car or something along those lines.
A lot of time I hear, thank you. It's like, because, they'll go to the VA, and I'm not saying do not go get mental health, therapy, whatever. I'm not saying that at all. But a lot of the veterans that come and speak to my students, they use it almost instead of going to therapy, because they come in, they talk to them, they will say things to them. Kids today, they have no filter. They'll ask you point blank, and it's really unique to sit there and see that. So, of course, the question I always get, from my students, like, hey, can you bring a guy in that, did combat in Vietnam? I was like, are you sure you want this? Are you sure you want me to bring that person in? Because he will answer every question you have. And I always tell him, it's like, you might not like what you get. So when combat comes in, he tells them everything. And their whole attitude about war, it's like, who did that? It's like, did you feel that? It's like, he was the enemy. And like, that's how he says it. And he's like, that was the person. Like, no, it was the enemy. I was doing my duty. And that's why we were there. We were charged with this, and we carried out orders, and we did what we were supposed to do. And he tells those stories, and the students, they start kind of having a bit more empathy and feeling for him. Like, oh my God, you went through this and you're still normal, and it's just like, that's the biggest thing. You come out, it's like, oh my God, like, how are you still, functional after doing all this crazy stuff and, in combat the way that you did? And it's just like, we just had to keep soldiering on. We just had to come home and and it's the revelation that students have because they're all in the video game worlds now, and he always prefaces it, there's no reset button. You don't respawn somewhere, in the jungles of Vietnam. If you're lucky, they find your body and able to ship it back home. And it's just like, they had no clue. There's so much isolation that takes place. And that's why I bring the veterans in, because they put that human face on that. We talk about the protest marches and all that stuff that took place, during the 60s and 70s about, the protesters protesting the war in Vietnam, and it's just like, I had one guy, he was a lieutenant, and he served, over there at LZ Professional, in Vietnam. And he was search and destroy missions all the time is what he ran, and he talked about, he did it for did 2 tours in Vietnam. And when he finally came home, it's just like getting spit on, rocks thrown at him and stuff like that. And I'll tell you this, one of the funniest things that Lieutenant Patterson told my students was that he's like, yeah, you know what? How many of y'all have powdered laundry detergent in your houses? A lot of the kids, they raise their hands. Okay, where's he going with this? When I told my troops to have all their parents, mothers, whatever families send in all the powdered laundry detergent they could have, or they could send in, because they would make napalm with it. And the kids, like, they're also, it's like, I'm not going to explain how to make napalm, but it's just like, they never put the connection. How does powdered laundry detergent equal a weapon of war? And they were all thinking, oh yeah, they're dirty in Vietnam. It's like, yeah, where are the washing machines? Yeah, they're none.
Incredible. Well, look, I mean, one of the most powerful tools for memory retention, for leadership, for adult learning is storytelling. The most incredible words for anybody to hear, the 3 words is once upon a time. 4 words. Sorry, I'm a Marine. I can't count my words as well. But, sharing those stories is so much deeper than getting it into those books. And that's one of the things we try to do here at Warrior Legacy Network, is encourage that storytelling between those that are coming out, those that have been out, those that support the veterans, to let them know, A, they're not alone, and B, get a chance to share stories. I mean, we go all the way back to Cro-Magnon time, where the guys were out, getting a brontosaurus and then coming back to the fire and sitting around the fire and talking in grunts and stuff. And then you go back to the biblical time, or the ancient Roman soldiers or the biblical soldiers, all again sitting around a fire with some kind of meat, telling stories, sharing those things. So powerful. And it's so great what you're doing to make sure that those people aren't going to last forever, but it is possible to have those stories last forever if we can continue to tell them in those amazing lessons.
It's the living history that's there, and people often, bypass that. They see the old guy wearing, like the Vietnam hat, and it's like, you got no idea what those ribbons on his hat mean. You have no idea what that guy at 18 or 19 years old was doing. One of the big things, I do a lot of work with World War II veterans, and I still do a lot of work with World War II history as a World War II historian. A couple years ago, I had May Cryer, who is one of the last, living Rosie the Riveters. She's absolutely phenomenal human being. I had her video chat in with my students during a presentation once. And when they bombed Pearl Harbor, she was just like, we did our duty. We protected our country at 17 years old. And the funny thing was, as my students are listening to her, this will really kind of put a thought into your head. The majority of the questions that May got were about, well, didn't you feel worried? Weren't you scared? Weren't you, all the anxiety questions that kids today have, all this anxiety. And it's like, no, we were attacked. We did our duty. We wanted to sit there and defend America and defend our country. So she and her sister went out to Seattle and signed up for Boeing, and they built bombers. because she was small enough. She would literally put the nacelle inside the B-29 wings because she was small enough to do that, and there are pictures of her doing it. And she's sitting here telling my students this story, and they're all just sitting there thinking, because the majority of them were 16, 17 at the time, and, she was like, it's just that was like, were you scared? And it's just, it was amazing to hear her response in that. So, and I think it really puts kind of a fine point on where kids are today. I've been teaching 22 years. This will make year 23. And I've had students shot. I've had students, beaten. I've seen things, out of your worst nightmare that you couldn't possibly ever imagine something happening to a child. But I have seen that in my 22 years of doing the job. And it's hard. It really is, But when people like me and our Black Ops veterans come in, our Vietnam veterans come in, Korean veterans come in, and be able to tell these stories, it really gives them a way to have that kind of therapy. And that's why I'm such a huge advocate for that. Other organizations that support the work that I do, Grunstyle always is a huge supporter. Tim Jensen's a fabulous human being, and along with Daniel Eric and the Grunstyle team. So whenever I present and support, they're always out there supporting the work that I do. Mighty Hero Homes is another one. They support my work as well, along with Hoist, hydration. It's just,
Tim's a great guy and just a master storyteller. He's been to my house. I know him very well. He's just amazing. I didn't recognize the last time I saw him because he had just shaved his beard off. I'm like, what? Who's that guy? Just a perfect example of someone carrying on that same legacy that you're talking about and sharing those stories.
One of the things that, so I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 2007. So I never made it all the way through basic training. I made it all the way to third phase, but I went into anaphylactic shock on the weapons side of the island. Yeah. And it's like, when that happened, I was
hit by a ant or stung or what?
I never found out. I was guy from my platoon. I was riding high, and all of a sudden we're, on the weapons side, where the old airfield is, we're sitting here doing morning PT, we're sitting down, all of a sudden I feel something biting my leg, and, I'm like, all right, brush it off, whatever. And we're walking back to, the weapons side squad bay, and one of my squad leaders said, hey, you're starting to swell up, whatever. Very soon after that, all I can remember is an EpiPen going into my leg and having a chat with Series Commander telling me, it's just like, it's not your fault. Your body quit. I was just, it didn't make me feel any better because it's one of those things, I had my entire life geared towards the Marine Corps. I was going to be legal administration, go to JAG, become a JAG lawyer, do all these cool things. And it was robbed from me. It was taken from me. And then transitioning back, what do I do now? I had a wife and a young daughter at the time, and I was totally, counting on my military career to provide a new way of life. And so it was hard going back. There was some depression and some stress coming back and, being able to, fortunately enough for me, I had my teaching license before I went in. So when I came out, and it was still hard because, just getting a job around 2007 and 2008 was really hard because you had the economic housing collapse and, but it was rough. But I finally came across a good mentor that, guided me kind of through the process and helped me get that first job in Duval County. And I thank him for that every day. And it's been a fantastic run ever since. Whether you are getting discharged from boot camp or you're getting discharged 30 years in, that transition process is still, it's still a process. Going from the military world back to the civilian world. I just signed up with Evan Guzman of Post Veterati as one of his mentors to be able to mentor the new people coming out, helping them get it connected with jobs, that kind of thing. I mentor a lot of the new teachers at my school, that are coming straight in out of college. And a lot of it is the same kind of work, being able to facilitate and help them grow, as they move from one category to another, and that's why I like what you do, because you just give veterans a way to have that conversation and resources and avenues for them to pursue,
Well, thank you for recognizing that. And our thing is, we're not here to replace any other organization. What we're trying to focus on is making a quality match. That's the 90% of what we're doing. So that way, once that quality match happens, then they can start learning about those different areas. We're not focused just on occupation. We're focused on, it could be social, it could be religious, it could be a whole different things. Hey, I'm moving from, Camp Pendleton down to Jacksonville, Florida, and I want to find a really good a non-denominational church, or, hey, I've got a dog and I want to find people that are in dog walking, or, hey, I was trained in satellite communications and I'd really like to find someone that's in the comm world that can help mentor me. And then our thing is to connect them with all those different incredible organizations that you just talked about, kind of being that hub there.
It's, we're all in this together. We are, and that's the thing. Veterans, a lot of them, a lot of the ones that I talk to, they have that isolation feeling, friends, faith, family, finances are, kind of the core four key things you kind of need when you're transitioning out, especially whether, and you don't have to be Christian, you don't have to be whatever. I mean, it doesn't, just having some type, of community to belong to, that you're not by yourself, that, you have something, that's outside of your family. Walk into whatever church you want, walk into a non-denominational, walk into, look at the public calendar of events, go to a local meeting of some kind. Hey, the civic engagement meeting, you might find some people there that they're veterans, serve in a lot of these different organizations. And a lot of times they look for people to sit there and have that conversation with and talk with. And all they want to do is be able to share what they experienced with someone else. And that can be, and I'm sure you've seen it, that can be the difference between, that bullet and them putting that gun down and picking up the phone.
The job of our military is not just to make great Marine sailors, airmen, guardians. It's to make great Americans. And that journey doesn't stop at boot camp or doesn't stop at 30 years. It stays on forever. Your patriotism is, and I used to think that the military makes you patriotic. No, I think you're patriotic when you go into the military, or you wouldn't do it. And then there's stuff. And look, yes, there are people that are going just for the money or just going for the school, but there's still a level of patriotism to that thing. As we get transition out, a lot of people, say that thank you for your service. The thing is, don't just thank a veteran for their service, serve them. They have served you through their sacrifices, no matter how major or how minor it was. This is our chance to get back and to help resettle them into the community, give them that sense of purpose, get rid of that isolation, which is very, very dangerous because it's a entryway into a lot of those other dark things that happen. And like you said, get that tribe and share the stories, because in those stories, we start to realize how much we really have in common with each other too.
Yeah, it brings me back to, so my great uncle was a combat medic, 749th Tank Battalion, World War II. My other great uncle, Timmy, was a bomber pilot. My great aunt was a wave, during World War II. And what I tell my students is like Miss Flint, who was left at home? And I was like, well, probably one sibling was probably left at home. You guys have to understand, everybody served. And everybody stepped up and did their duty and did their service. And, I have every letter my great uncle wrote from 1943 in San Antonio, where he went to his schoolhouse for, becoming a combat medic, to 1945 Berlin. And he was a Utah Beach survivor. So I have his June 1st letter, and I've got his June 8th letter. And
my goodness,
I have those printed out, and I send them. I let my students read them, and I was like, "Can you figure out what his personality is? Can you see the difference?" And a lot of these kids don't know about D-Day. They don't, and it's real. And I know it's like, how could not know? And because they don't know the history behind it. And I have them read the letter before we do the lesson. And I try to sit there and have them pull out the personality of the person that wrote it. And it's just like, it's night and day. He's happy, cheery, excited, gung-ho, the invasion's coming, and, they're all there, and then on the June 7th or 8th letter, it's just like so somber. Talking about.
Please, if you don't mind sharing that, I'd love to post that on this link for this podcast here. I think the listeners.
Yeah, I'll go dig them out and I'll show them. I'll share them with you. Yeah, like the post. Yeah, the thing in the post. Yeah, and the students, they sit there and they read those. And I have his unit photo album, and I share those photos with my students as well. And it's wild. When I started showing the photos to veterans, they were doing all the same goofy stuff that combat vets do now, people that are serving, they were doing that too. They were sitting on tanks and being goofballs and, playing with all the gear. And I have all those photos. And it just goes to show you that type of veteran humor, it never dies. And
it really is the same. And they've actually uncovered old Roman cave drawings of the Roman soldiers drawing penises on the wall, which is pretty much what every modern day soldier sailor Marine does. So, well, on that note, we'll finish up on that. Daniel, thanks for all you do for not just our veterans, but what you do for that next generation. I mean, you are making our country such a greater, stronger, better country by inspiring that generation, especially a lot of those that didn't have the opportunity to grow up that you and I may have, and let them know that what a beautiful opportunity it is to serve our country and to kind of break that cycle of violence and poverty that they may only know. And I think it's really cool what you're doing. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to learn more about the Black Ops Project or the other?
You could type Daniel Tobias Flint into Google and all that information about me pops back. Go to my LinkedIn page. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. You can look at Black Ops foundation.org. My information as a member of the board of directors is there also. LinkedIn is probably the best way to get a hold of me. And I advocate for a lot of different programs and a lot of different organizations. I can't thank you enough for having me on and letting me share these stories with you. And, it's all about the next generation coming through. It's, a lot of the reasons why I teach, is I worry about where the country is going. And it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. I just worry about the values. It used to be called, and with this, it used to be called Republican motherhood. The idea that, mothers in the early national period, are talking from 1795 to 1812 kind of thing. Women would be at home teaching the ideals that the nation was founded upon, and it actually became known as what was known as Republican motherhood. This is before mandated schooling, in the 1840s and all that. It was left to moms, women, wives, whatever, to teach those foundational concepts to their children so they would have an understanding of the Constitution, the Republic that they are growing up in. And that's kind of how I see that as a modern version of it, that it's my civic, responsibility to mentor that next generation coming through, because when they go to the voting booth, I want to make sure they understand what they're voting for. That, I want to make sure they understand, what our country stands for beyond the propaganda, beyond, all the foolishness that goes on in the media and everything else. I want them to have a solid historical foundation of who we are as a nation. And that's intertwined with our military and our veterans, the guys over at Four Branches Bourbon, Mike Trott, RJ Casey, Harold Undertown, they have, their slogan, a sip to remember. I love those guys to death. I do. And that's a sip to remember is such a key thing, because when you sit down and you get those veterans talking to each other, having that drink, having that camaraderie with them is, and even doesn't even have to be alcohol. I love the theming they have.
Again, it's back to sitting around the fire with a bottle of bourbon or bottle of water or whatever it is, and just sharing those stories. So, well, Daniel, have a wonderful evening. Again, thank you for all you do. And we will hopefully have our paths cross again here soon, maybe with Rico next time.
Thank you so much. You have a good night.
All right. Hoorah.
If you've worn the uniform and figured out how to make the jump into civilian life, or if you're getting ready to PCS to the civilian world, there's somebody right now who needs your story. Go to warriorleader.us/mentorship. Share your journey. Help the next one in line. That's what this is all about.